So I'm Debbie Murphy, and I'm the president of Op Central. On behalf of my co-host, Paul Martin, the CEO of APX Data, and myself, I'd like to welcome you to our virtual roundtable. I'd like to thank all of you not only for your patience now, but for taking the time to join us, and particularly those of you in the UK and Europe who I know are there, who really drew the short straw with time zones. I know it must be long past bedtime, so I appreciate you staying up. I am confident this will be engaging enough that you won't be able to sleep for a few hours afterwards too. Over the last couple of months, we've been sharing our industry expert mini webinar series. And for those of you that have missed it, it is still available if you look down on our LinkedIn page, and I would recommend that you go and have a look at it. We've been so overwhelmed by the response to it that we just knew we had to get this crew together for a good discussion. What has been wonderful is that this is a really experienced group of people that have such different contexts but share a common goal. So as much as, you know, we've got from volunteers who might battle with connectivity to people that have worked in quite leading edge technology, we're all trying to achieve the same thing. And I think that helps us all understand where we fit into this technology journey. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves before they answer each of their first question. We have obviously started a little bit late, but I would like to welcome Chief Nam and Chief Tracy, who doesn't look like he's quite joined yet, Captain Mackenzie, Chief Lewis, and Chief Horn. We are so grateful to have you here today. Now, lucky for us, Chief Tracy is not going to be answering the first question, so we can actually get started. I will, in the meantime, probably go on mute and hide my video so I can see if I can track him down. But thank you very much. Right, I'm going to put the first question out to Chief Lewis and Chief Horn. With so much information available, it could seem difficult to know kind of where to begin. Are there any kind of readily available data sources that are being underutilized in the industry at the moment?
Chief Horn, this is you first, please.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so I'm Chief Horn. I'm Fire Chief of Rock Creek Fire, which is halfway between Steamboat Springs and Vail, Colorado. We're 244 square miles of God's country, a very rural volunteer fire department. And connectivity would be one of our issues, that making sure that we can get our information. So what I think is being underutilized is obviously for us. I would go ahead and start off saying we use a lot of paper products. We don't like using a map book like everybody doesn't use anymore, but we definitely use technology for mapping, especially for wildland fires, for getting our egress and how to get in and how to get to the point of the fire, and then also find out who owns the land. It's very important to know the ownership of the land, whether it's BLM, Forest Service, private, school section. You know, we want to make sure we know whose land it is. So we definitely use, we'll sometimes have to use a map book because we can't get all the downloads for all the different mapping. And one of the other ones I think are underutilized and we should use better, but it's a difficult process to get into, is our NFIRS. It's our National Fire Incident Reporting System, and it's a very cumbersome product. It's a product that you have to go in online and plug in data in each boxes. It's like a CRM, a customer relations management tool, and it's a great tool to turn around and use for data. Yet it would be really nice if we could figure out a way how we can get that information in there quicker. What do you have, Lewis?
Well, first of all, Chief Horn, I can relate with the knowing whose property it is. So that's and definitely the struggles with the NFIRS. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Alan Lewis. I'm the fire chief in Virginia, Minnesota. I also teach for Columbia Southern University and the professor of as a professor in the College of Safety and Emergency Services. I would say that the most readily available data sources that are being underutilized today in the industry probably have to do with both. I broke it into structure and people. So in the structural approach, I would say that the digital twin approach, which is receiving quite a bit of attention by a number of software companies that are modeling software according to today's fire service needs. If you combine modern GIS systems with the building information modeling, it really can provide us quite a detailed, true-to-life 3D representation of structures, landscapes, special hazards, unique conditions, and assets both inside and outside of facilities. When I think about that digital twin approach, it really gives us a greater understanding of the individual structures and the built environment as a whole. So if we can be prompted through this, we can improve fire prevention planning because we have enhanced visualization as well as better tactical and strategic decisions during an operation. So if we employ the classical decision making model, these additional inputs that this digital twin approach gives us can give us better planning and operational pictures. And then you add in the remote sensing with drones, handheld imagery, and some of the other available resources, such as LiDAR. You can take these robust, time-sensitive, current situational models and then make it more available. There can, a lot of times there's a snapshot in time where this is happening. Those technologies exist. We just haven't been real good about utilizing some of those because we look at it after the fact. And I think we're getting to a point and especially when you come to underutilization in the industry, where we're going to have these dynamic 3D models for managing pre-fire planning and even operational responses to buildings, the WUI environment, like Chief Horn talked about, and even these models that can be adapted to the natural or man-made disaster applications. It's very real. The existing data sources, I think, are there. We're just not fully utilizing them. One example would be LiDAR being used at an initial residential building fire. So, for example, rather than listing a somewhat subjective definition, when we roll up on scene and we say volume, velocity, density, and color, what if we could actually quantify that and then use that in a risk analysis as a descriptors of smoke emitting from the building? Rather than just say, well, it's light and white, or it's dark, it's dense, those are all very, very subjective. But what if, as it's often said, if it's predictable, it's preventable. I would also say if it's measurable, it's transmissible. When it comes to people, I would say the commercial products out there like Google, Facebook, railroads transmit data where their trains are. Yet do we have an alert that comes when we have a train blocking a crossing into our CAD system? I don't. That's a pretty simple one. It's transmitting. How could I know where every single helicopter in the entire area of operations in Iraq was, getting a blip every 5 seconds on a Blue Force tracker, and I don't know where another engine's coming from, another ambulance is coming from, a train? There's a lot of stuff that we can do with existing CAD data, and even the police side of the CAD data, where we can share that information. So that's my 2 cents.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Are there any, what we'll do is we've got 5 kind of overarching questions. If there are any that have come through, if there are any relevant questions, please post them in the comments, and Paul Martin will be helping facilitate that. Right, we are going to move on pretty quickly because, as I said, we started a little bit late. Right, Chief Num and Captain Mackenzie, I'm going to throw this one to you. There are a lot of data sources that are available. Why do you think it's important to bring this together? Why can't we just use them in the state that they are available right now? Chief Nam, you are on mute, but we're going to throw it to you first.
Give them time to find the right tack channel. No?
Thank
All
you.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to vote we
Alrighty.
do this in person next time. Yeah.
That was operator error somewhere else on the other side of the world here. So, well, I'll preface the statement or the question with this: the complexity of the built environment, incident time demands and time compression, escalating time-dependent decision making, static versus dynamic data acquisition and interpretation, and accurate building intelligence. So again, when we talk about the importance of having multiple data sources, there's really no single data source that's typically available that can distinctively provide structured, contextual, reliable, applicable data that results and provides both timely, retrievable information, and then accounts for the comprehensive interpretation, analysis, and recognition that would influence decision making. In other words, again, we have many applications that are currently available, or the more traditional and classical approaches toward data acquisition or availability that are typically time consuming, error prone, incomplete, incompatible, extraneous, inaccurate, fragmented, and more often than not siloed. So the availability of accessing multiple disparate data sources that creates a high probability and likelihood for command compression due to informational overload or distractions or data abandonment, and primarily failing to utilize what we have available is part of those challenges and processes. When we take a look at having other than a single platform, again, we have the ability to lessen the error-likely human performance component of having incomplete or inaccurate information and that analysis, and then that ability to interpret that data and intelligence, primarily giving us what we call critical conservative bias and risk management modeling. So, a single source type platform that has good integration and has the ability to take a look at the aggregation of data intelligence that both provides continuity and it provides the opportunity for probability and predictability modeling of an incident, especially when we talk about buildings and fires type structures. And more often than not, it gives us the ability to simulate both patterning, targeting, value identification, and again, the ability, as we currently have going forward, the ability to integrate artificial intelligence integration and really align with the human performance component. And that's a key part of this is really being able to take artificial intelligence applications, integrating that with human performance related tools and adaptability to aid and integrate into the decision-making process. So it gives us that fluid building intelligence. So a single platform, again, if we are looking at that as the ultimate definition, it has to be really developed for the context of local level risks, organizational structuring, operational demands of the built environment, and occupancy risk profiling. That's everything from that small rural organization all the way to a metro urban sized organization or a regionalized organization. So multi-platform approaches, single platform application, integrating much of what we currently have available and then expanding upon that just provides for a higher degree of integrity, accuracy, and really allows for a much more fluid level of data acquisition and then utilizing the tools for interpretation.
Thank you.
Cap, I'll turn it over to you.
Uh, well, I'm not going to say you're a tough act to follow. That's quite obvious for everyone who might be watching or listening. So I'm Captain Kirk McKenzie, recently retired, 32 years in the business, ran a couple calls and realized after all those years I hadn't scratched the surface and what might we do. And so to Debbie's question on why is it important to bring in multiple data sources, I think about recognition prime decision making, which is often based on, do we have the available data set that we need for situational awareness? And in the traditional legacy two-way communication platform for fireground operations or MCIs or whatever call we might be on, it's a limited command and control model. And I've started to look at, and I think we all are well to look at the DoD rather than a C2 model, a C6 ISR model. So command, control, communications, computers, in their case, combat systems. That'd be more in our law enforcement officer area, but I have also cyber, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, which all might help us in these areas of, in the WUI, we have the wildland standing firefighting orders, the 18 situations that shall watch out, which are primarily about not having the essay we need to make. Unfamiliar territory, not scouted in the daylight, unfamiliar, uninformed. And so multiple sources of data might help us improve some of the NIOSH 5, the leading causes for death and injury in our industry is risk assessment, incident command, accountability, communications, and lack of or didn't follow SOPs. All of it that we can do with interoperable, ubiquitous digital solutions. And one day maybe we'll talk about that somebody was injured because there was a failure to the mesh network, or the 5G stepped down to 4G, or the ML and the AI only had 1 terabyte of data to make intelligent decisions. boy, I'm not looking forward to anybody being injured, but I'm looking forward to that because I don't think any of us ever have, any incident commander has the data set that they want in hindsight. So thanks for your work, Debbie, to look at bringing data streams together.
Well, good. Thanks, Captain Mackenzie. Right. As he should do, we've had Chief Tracy make a great entrance, and just in time, I'm going to throw a question to you, and then I'm going to ask for Chief Horn to answer the same question. I think this is a collective effort, as much as APX and Op Central and a lot of other product companies out there are working really hard to solve the challenge. The community and the industry need to do some work too. So what work do you think needs to be done to actually get better intelligence? Right. Chief Tracy, do you want
That's
to
a
start?
question to Britta, no?
No, both of you. So I'd like you to start, given we
Oh,
haven't heard from you
I'd
yet.
like to defer to the chief first.
All right, no problem.
Thank you very much, Chief Tracy. Again, Chief Horn from Rock Creek Fire here in Colorado. I think the pieces that are really important to our community and industry and intelligence and making sure that we're working together is definitely collaboration, just the value in collaboration. As the vice president of state fire chiefs, we just had a meeting today with professional firefighters, career, combination, and volunteer fire departments, and we had to figure out a way to have that value and that system that's going to work for all departments and all types of departments. Definitely on the situational awareness and increasing the type of information that we could put in there. So what we could get from other departments, whether it's a city or a county, we could definitely find out more about inspections when they're doing building inspections and what's going on with the building and lumen contents. And then when they're doing, there's sprinklers in the system. We can definitely do that in the at the station. But knowing if that a building department could put that information in, that would be readily available. And also in the assessor's office here in Colorado, we have assessors that actually know the type of land and what other buildings are there and what other occupancies are on that property or other types of buildings. It'd be great to have that information included too. I would also think we could have some risk profiles added to it. And definitely from the utilities department, why aren't we getting from all the different utilities of what's coming into all those different types of buildings or those types of properties? This kind of information, like you said, is broad based and it's across the county, it's across the cities and across the towns. And we should probably have all that information in one place to be successful as we're going to those calls. Chief Tracy, what do you have?
Well, I'll tell you what. Why am I glad I deferred to you first? Because you set the table, and really everything that you just mentioned, every department should be doing. But it's the cities that really need to prepare us, and they need to build upon the infrastructure that's going to really make this happen. The question being, what work needs to be done by a community. Really, the community is going to be the municipality, the cities that we respond to and provide all of our services. And our services are more than just fire. It's emergencies, and of course, medical interventions, things like that. Each municipality or city, township, whatever, they should have a department planning that is planning and economic development and all of these things, and they should be looking to put together. And of course, you mentioned utilities. Uh, Everyone needs to be at the table here. The fire service, city planners, utility companies, other agencies, if you will. It could be police. All of these agencies, we need to voice our needs so that they can plan an infrastructure that will, one, support all of our needs, give us access. Let's just say a building department that issues permits for alterations or construction, things like that. The fire department should have access to that. For if it is an existing building undergoing, let's say, an alteration or some type of renovation, we need to know about that. And we should be over there, of course, let's say, introducing ourselves to the contractors to make sure they're honest. I mean, we could look at Nfpa 241 and show it to them in case they're not familiar with it. And that when there's construction sites or renovations going on in the building, there has to be a site safety manager, and all of his contractors and employees. If there's an emergency or a fire in the building and they have to evacuate, he's got to have a plan, or she's got to have a plan. And where are they going to muster, and how are we going to count for all of them? If you would have looked at all the, let's say, video news captures of the Hard Rock Hotel that collapsed in New Orleans, and right after that collapse, you saw construction workers walking all around the street. Nobody had accountability of anybody. They had no idea how many members or construction workers were actually trapped in that collapse. So that's not, well, let's just put it this way, that's unacceptable. And to have all of these people at the table and for them to set up an infrastructure and a cloud, and of course it's going to be a secure cloud. Only certain, let's say, IP addresses are allowed, or maybe if we show up at a building, we have to show a smart device that shows a Q code, and then it gives us access to building information there. These are things that we're looking for, and I really like this team that Debbie put together here, because everybody comes from a different background, and they're all offering something that really is important. And I noticed as people were entering, a gentleman by the name of Brent Brooks from Toronto logged on. Hey, is that Brent? I tell you what, there's a gentleman who's making a difference up in Canada. Toronto is probably the most congested, if not has the most high-rise buildings, second in all of North America, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Brent? In all of North America. And you're doing wonderful things up there. And all of this is important. I also noticed Mike Dugan from FDNY logged on, and there's a gentleman I respect very much. So we've got a large audience. Is it true that Dennis O'Neill might be listening? What a mentor he is to so many people.
I'm not sure if he's on, but he certainly accepted the invitation to join. So if it's not this, he will likely be watching the recording.
Well, that was my 2 cents.
Thank you very much, Chief Tracy. I see we've got a couple of questions from Dave, but I'm actually going to mash them into one because both of them actually come to adoption. And I'm happy for anyone to take this, but I'm probably looking to Captain McKenzie if he's happy to. And that is, you know, there are technologies out there that are going to help. Why are there issues in terms of adoption, and why are we kind of falling back on some old tech when there are things that can be done differently? I've mashed your questions together. I appreciate you. Welcome to go into more detail.
Well, thank you. I saw one of them that I can speak to, and then I saw half of the other one. Maybe why are we still investing in two-way land mobile radios? Ooh, that's a political one. I'll just leave it for somebody else. But the common operating picture that I saw mentioned is something called ATAC, an open source platform out of the Air Force Research Lab. And there are a few jurisdictions using that. ATAC, CivTAC, ITAC. The bottom line, like with Ops Central or Apex, we need the common operating system, and it needs to be able to let in data streams that, to Chief Tracy's point, are appropriate to let in and maybe secure and encrypted. And that it, like, I don't know how many folks we have from around the world. I've seen several colleagues from out of the country pop in, and not just the EU, but Australia. You know, they're on a different time zone too. They're on tomorrow already. We're all jumping on, had a little technical difficulty, and here we are on this meeting together in our own place, and yet emergency response is delayed. The why? People policies, procedure, budget constraints. Some jurisdictions I'm hearing can't even raise, regardless of what the county assessor brings in. They're capped at how much they can raise their fire department budget, and they're not looking good. And yet, I think we'll get to the close. What can we do? I think it's not the why to me, because 7,000 people die in the U.S. every day before COVID, 100 million around the world from all sorts of causes. It's what can we do through digitization to improve on what we've done over the last years to maybe make a difference.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm going to throw the next question to Chief Lewis and Chief Nam. So we spoke about all of these data sources and bringing them together. What can we do to reduce the risk of cognitive overload? How do we make sure that we're not actually making things worse by providing so much information that everything gets lost again? Right. Chief Nam, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. All right. So when we talk about cognitive overload. You know, we're talking about working memory, we talk about complex problems, complex incidences, and more often than not, conflicting multiple priorities. And that becomes that perfect storm. Too much, too little, too much data, too little data that we either ignore due to time considerations. We may have an actual or perceived or a lack of any type of technology literacy. We're techno-fear or we're technology illiterate, and we fail to understand those applications relative to those tools and processes. So when we talk about looking at managing multiple degrees of contextual informational data from varied resources on a very fluid informational exchange basis, there needs to be that understanding of the importance and the priority and that interrelationship. And it all really goes back to the fundamentals of how we have typically operated in a very traditional prescriptive fireground modeling standpoint. We've always really relied on a combination of both experience, predictability of what we have experienced in the past with what we are dealing with. We've dealt with fireground parameters, taking a look at those guesses of what those postulated conditions may be. So that information exchange has always come forward and gone back and forth, and we've relied on a lot of experience. One of the challenges that we currently have is that in the absence of experience, how do we utilize data, both the availability of information that we're getting on scene, as well as that information that may be extraneous, the data flow of information. And more often than not, because of the complexity of what we are not, that we have not experienced, whether it be a super tall, a mega tall high rise, a podium constructed building, the emerging aspects of mass timber, or some unknown type of building occupancy or incident, we no longer have that ability to rely on those past experiences of which recognition prime decision making really was the formative basis of it all. So it's very easy to get that type of information overload in our current context of operations. So the availability of that data and information, those influencers, is there, but yet I believe that through that fear factor, that reluctance to even look at the data when it's brought forward, because we as commanders feel, actual or perceived, that we have to focus in on the incident. The incident ends up managing us versus us managing that incident. And although we have a lot of information flow, we don't have a very effective way to manage that ability to identify, extrapolate, connect some of the patterns that the data may be giving us in terms of that availability, and then utilize the human performance part of it, our minds and our abilities based upon how we've been trained to react to that information. So some of the ability to set those barriers up comes about through training and experience. Number one, becoming more literate to what we have available and how to utilize them as tools. And that's what they are. They are an aggregate level of tools that has to have the ability for the right level of filtering, the right level of dilution or prioritization, so that when I'm brought information, I quickly can interpret and make a good educated decision based on my experiences in my command capacity. It's when you don't have the right balance of all of those elements that we get into this cognitive overload, and we suddenly feel overwhelmed. And what do we normally default on? How we've done business in the past. And that becomes the glaring issue, because we cannot and we no longer have the ability to rely on past performances of what we've done, especially when we talk about unusual incidences that we don't have any type of historical context. We have never fought a fire in a particular type of building relative to severity and magnitude based upon the emerging aspects of what we are learning about in terms of fire behavior, fire performance within our buildings and such. So in simple terms, an individual in a rural or suburban setting, commanding officers, again, we're going to talk about that in that context, they very well may become very overwhelmed by a very simple fire that's simple to others that have familiarity and experience in dealing with those over some level of frequency. So in the setting of a small rural or suburban setting, that information has to be available. The individuals need to be trained, or at least become aware of how to utilize that tool and leverage it and have the right appropriate command staffing to help support going forward. Otherwise, they will default back to what we've always traditionally done. So now we move that forward, the ball forward a little bit to the complex urban and suburban, or excuse me, the complex urban and metro environments where we are experiencing very significant and very high magnitude incidences of which we do not have a lot of history behind, whether it be, again, incidences with ACM in our high-rise applications around the world. We are learning only through that level of sharing. But the platforms that we are talking about here today, relative to data acquisition, looking at the information in terms of the Internet of Things, in terms of what is available, how can we filter it and apply it into the platform. So I'll go back to the original statement, and I don't want to use up my 5 minutes too much here quickly. But again, it's the context. How can I take something that's manageable, that has modules, that is not obsolete right from the get-go, that provides some literacy to those that may be not literate, but does not have a steep learning curve to apply to a profession that's all about stretching the hose. It's blue collar workmanship, and now we're talking about technology moving its way into it. It's not any different than what we've experienced back in the mid to late 1980s with technology changing the way we do business. But in this platform and day and age, I think that we have to be much more adaptive. We have to utilize these analytical tools, and we've got to get the fire service to understand, to grasp that application of what we have available from a technology standpoint, and recognize that it is a critical tool, whether it be a small rural fire department, and leverage that into that single incident fire or wildfire, structural fire, or some other complex incident, and to be able to apply it to a urban or metro-sized organization in which, again, we may not have that experience for that particular incident, but we have data that can be driven and can be analyzed utilizing artificial intelligence and so many other leveraging of technology and the applied benefits of that intelligent data to help support incident management. And that becomes the critical linchpin. It's taking that technology and all of that data information, making it accessible and useful, and still allow for some degrees of interpretation, but at the same time, having suggested avenues and paths to go on in the decision-making process. Not to become the absence of decision-making, but for the incident command team to recognize what's the information telling me, how can I interpret it, and based upon my best judgment as a commanding officer and as part of that commanding team, based upon what we're seeing in that street, how can we now leverage our experiences? But sometimes, again, if I'm dealing with an unknown factor, we see time and time again this emerging concept of podium mixed occupancy use construction. And for our international audience, again, we talk about the adoption of the emerging trend of mass timber related applications within our buildings. But when we create these hybrid structures, no one in the entire world has a history of experience in operating these. So we are learning as we go. But I truly believe the context of that information to support the platform and the availability of that data would help support the decision-making process and potentially influence what we end up doing on scene. So it's just having the right tool to help support that decision-making process when we become overwhelmed, which sometimes it becomes an overwhelming situation far too quickly with an inexperienced cadre of our firefighters on the fire department side, the brigade side, or certainly within the command side. Chief?
Thanks, Chief Nam. Before we throw it to Chief Lewis, I see Chief Tracy raised his hand there, so you might have something to add. Yeah.
I think I was just hit with a cognitive overload. No, and I'm being facetious. I'm not concerned with cognitive overload. I'm concerned with cognitive dissonance. I'm concerned with people that are not open to new technology, nor do they, are open to use it and things like that. When we first met, Deb, and we had our first conversations on what now Op Central, what you could offer the fire service. the only reason I had a conversation with you was because I was looking for someone, an entity, that could provide the fire service a buffet of information. It's not going to be a cognitive overload of information. I'm not going to have a screen, a smart phone, a tablet, a computer in front of me that's going to overload me with information, and I'm going to be so confused. What do I look at? No, you're going to give me a buffet of information. I'm going to choose what I need at the moment. While I'm responding, I might be looking at information. I might be looking at an aerial view of the building. I know the address. It's showing me the streets. It's showing me my water supplies. It's showing my fire department connections to the fire protection system. It's showing me where the utilities come into the building. And then from there, if I know what the alarm is, whether it be a building, a complex, or a site, a construction site, or a wildland fire, I'll know all of it. I'll pick the information as I choose. So I don't think there's any such thing as a cognitive overload. It's just know what you want and pick at it. Thank you.
Great
We've been
answer.
dealing with a cognitive underload for far too long.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Excellent
And all
quote.
the things
Right.
that Britta spoke about, we go out, we perform inspections and things like that. We gather intelligence and we put it in a place that we can access it and make it work for us. Exactly. Sorry.
Excellent. Right. Chief Lewis, if you'd like
Well,
to follow that. Yeah.
that will be hard to follow. Christopher, thank you for that very nice expose. And Chief Tracy, I agree 100%. It is a buffet of information. And the two things I wanted to talk about is, I know the question asked about cognitive overload, but the cognitive dissonance is very, very important. So there are two primary types of information that I tied it back to. There's pushed information and there's pulled or retrievable information. And to understand which of those types of information you have control over and which you don't, I think so I'm starting from kind of an elementary point, but the pushed information in a high stress environment is the information that's arriving in our workspace, our command vehicle, where we are. We have little short-term control over this. This would be dispatch information, updates from arriving companies, the person who knocks on your command vehicle and says there's an occupant trapped, my baby's inside, whether that be a cat or whether that be a person. That is things that we don't have control over at times. It is just going to be pushed to us and we have to deal with it. We need a sort and filter mechanism like an Excel spreadsheet, right, Christopher? Where we can just kind of, what's the most important thing right now? If I have, and then I'll get into the pulled or retrievable information. So this is the information we can tap into. And we could be in our command vehicle, command center if it's a longer term incident. This is the information like the building layout, the engineering schematics for utilities that you talked about, Chief Tracy, the suppression systems. But perhaps it's a little further than that. Maybe we want to know the date of the last inspection, any deficiencies or hazards that were in this building. Is there an outstanding correction order? How many times have we been called to this address and why? Now, do I need this information when I have a trapped occupant claim showing? No. What I need to do at that point is I need to solve the problem in front of me. So this information, I know it was termed as cognitive overload, but it just isn't correctly sorted and filtered. So pushed information versus pulled or retrievable information is very, very important. We as fire officers have greater control over the pulled information point, that we intentionally seek it out. But instead of being immediately accessible, a lot of this information now just sits in these repositories, right? It's got these proprietary databases, these libraries, online journals, filing cabinets, discussion groups. Sometimes it's even in our chats with our colleagues or informal discussions. It's all this information that we have stored that's really in a pulled or retrievable form sometimes, but just not immediately accessible. The pushed information that we get has to be accurate and timely. Information intake, it has to be scalable, almost like turning a dial, I would say, but a dial that is sortable. So you can't have a 2.5, hose line with a smoothbore nozzle and operate that by yourself, right? You just have too much to deal with at that time. It's got to be gated down. It's got to be specific. There are times when our focus needs to be very narrow. If we have a downed firefighter, we do not need all of this building inspection information, the last, hazards. We need very specific information. Where's that firefighter? What resources do I have to get him or her? And then some of the things are longer term, such as, okay, we're switching from a defensive to an offensive attack. Then we can take in that slower sorting of material and information. When's the last inspection? When was the last? What are those influencing factors? So my recommendations, again, for avoiding, what they call the cognitive overload in the question, or the cognitive dissonance, is referred to as relevance to immediate needs. What are the short and long-term goals? Break it down, and then use that adjustable gallonage model. Gate it down through artificial intelligence. What information is actually immediately relevant, so we do not suffer from too much information. We suffer from appropriate, timely, accessible information.
Excellent answer. I think you did a very good job of following.
Did
Thanks
you
very
happen
much.
to notice the questions that were coming in, Deb?
We've combined a couple of them. I see that we've got one from Mark Chubb, who's also somebody we've been talking to for a long time. In fact, Mark and I used to work at
Oh, absolutely.
Fins at the same time.
What an old friend.
Most definitely. In fact, Mark Chubb is the reason I know Chief Tracy. He introduced us. And I think it's more comments and statements which we can read through. I'm conscious that we've only got 6 minutes left. I'm going to, as long as the panelists are happy to keep going a little bit, I would like us to get through. We've got another question that we've got prepared, and I would also like to ask your advice, and then we'll wrap it up. I appreciate if people need to drop off, but if you can keep going, that would be amazing. So I'm going to throw this question out to Captain Mackenzie and Chief Tracy. Let's dream for a little while. We've been talking about some of the challenges and the quick wins. What have you seen out there that is really kind of blown your mind in terms of new technology you think might revolutionize the industry?
A lot. And the more I look, the more I see. A few years ago, not very much. And to Chief Lewis's point on 3D laser scanning, when I got oriented to LiDAR, as it's known, light detection and ranging, I was carrying car batteries around, and one had to be on a portable generator charging all the time because it took that much power to measure, to use the 5,000 measurements a second tool. Now you can get a tablet that's measuring 1 million measurements a second. And there's just so much that can be done. And it's moving so quickly. I just was introduced through a DoD group to a photon team that's measuring millimeter accuracy at 1,000 feet range. And so and now there are geofence security cameras that literally, you don't need to have somebody watching the video camera to see somebody, a bad guy go into someplace they shouldn't belong. It's scanning real time in 3D. How do we get that information for an active shooter incident or all sorts of other things? How will we use machine vision, computer vision, and object recognition in real time? How can we get to real-time mixed physics computational fluid dynamic models in a high-rise? I think we're getting closer. I see teams working on converting 2D legacy paper drawings into 3D maps that could be streamed to us. All new buildings are all built in some sort of 3D CAD style, computer-aided design style. So BIM is persistent. How do we get our hands on it? How do we ingest it with 5G mesh network, open source geospatial data? And then how do we connect us to the people we serve? For the digital solutions on the way to me, the pseudo Iron Man style solution. And then the last thing, I'll pass it over to the chief, is we're not the end users. For every firefighter in the U.S. and average around the country, it's about one firefighter to 1,500 souls. It's the 1,499 other souls that need an app as well. We can call it Poke 911. I like 911 Go. Regardless of the name, they need to be enabled with building information modeling to escape earthquake, flood, fire, other natural man-made disasters. And the enterprise teams are starting to engage about this. How do we get, of the 7.5 billion connected souls, or 7.5 billion souls, 4.5 billion are connected on about 40 or 50 billion connected devices. Let's leverage that. So that's what I see, coming in due time.
I like everything you just shared with us, Kurt. You're right on the money. And I'm a fan of building information modeling, especially the 3D programs, because an incident commander, I mean, not all of our responses to high-rise buildings or any buildings are for fires. They're for emergencies. And in the 3D modeling programs, you could find the valve to isolate the switch, to isolate electrically, whatever, and just basically instruct your firefighters. I want you to go to third floor, center hallway, look in the ceiling, near the A stairwell up there. That's where the valve is. So, I mean, it really enhances our work that much better that we can serve our people. Things I'd like to see, there's traffic programs that my daughter uses this in the car whenever we're traveling, and it gives us information about traffic and things like that. Fire service vehicles should have the same programs to give us the best, fastest response based upon the traffic that's out there. We don't have to necessarily go in the direction that they're being suggested to go, but it would be a program that gives us the fastest response, and maybe you can control the traffic lights as well with the city infrastructure. But it would also give me an alert that if there's another fire apparatus that's responding from into another direction, if you will, because not all fire apparatuses are actually responding from the fire hall or the house. It gives us an alert where we could have an intersection, we would merge and maybe have an accident, things like that. I would also like to, the day that, I could sit here in my kitchen. I won't mention her name, but I could ask her the weather, play a song for me and this and that. I mean, I was walking from the living room into the kitchen, my wife's sitting in the kitchen, and I said, honey, I would like to, and all of a sudden this person responds, and my wife says, what goes on in this house when I'm not here? But I can speak to Siri. I would like to be able to speak voice to a computer, phone, iPhone, tablet, computer. Maybe I could use the term HAL. HAL was the computer that ran the spaceship in Space Odyssey. He was a little emotional. I mean, where he took over the place. I certainly wouldn't want a computer so emotional that when I start talking to the computer, he just says, what, you again? But no, I'd like to ask the buffet of information. Ask the computer exactly what I need. Show me a visual of the building. Okay, show me a floor plan of the sixth floor. That's where the reported fire or the event location is located. All of these things, that's where we hope to go one day. And Kurt, building information modeling, I'm a fan. We need to be able to access, there's many platforms, there's Autodesk, there's a couple of other manufacturers out there, but the fire service needs to be able to access them and understand and be able to use them. That was great stuff. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, sir.
Before I put this out to some last questions, I do want to call out that obviously Op Central and APX are here for a reason, and we obviously developing a platform. We are looking for 5 pilot departments to work with us. If you think you're an ideal candidate, please, I'll put my email address on the event, or connect with me. It would be awesome to actually collaborate. Or if you're just curious to see what we're doing, please reach out, and we would certainly love your feedback. But I'm going to go one more time around the round table and ask the panelists what advice they would give for chiefs if they could do one thing in 2021, and what's the risk of doing nothing? Right, I'm going to start with you, Chief Horn.
Oh, thank you. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity, Debbie. I really appreciate it. It's great to see everybody else on this call and being able to have this conversation. If there was one thing I would say, it's pretty much my rant all the time, is getting people in our community that are not traditional firefighters to go ahead and be a part of the fire department and bring their expertise. So whether it's social media, whether it's admin, whether it's grant writing, and just as we were talking with Chief Tracy about utilities, why don't we have somebody from our community representing the fire department on the utility board? That was something that's a big takeaway for me today. But also with all this technology and IT, we have a lot of people in our community that knows how to do the IT part and what works for a department. So having some people come in and volunteer and help us figure out what management wants, what the firefighter wants, and what the treasurer wants and what we can afford. It'd be great to have someone to beta test and figure out the products that would work best for us, because there's so many out there and what works best for each department. So thank you again. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Oh, thank you. Right, Chief Lewis. I'm just going how you're placed on my screen.
No worries. I would say that become familiar if you're a fire chief or a fire service officer with the smart cities concept. Look at some of these technologies that are out there. Become educated. Don't rely on the way that it's always been done. The way that it's always been done is not the way of the future. This will not set you up for success. It will not set your department up for success. So it is very, very important to be aware of emerging technologies, not just within the fire service, but just like Chief Horn said, look at the IT, look at where some of these other contributions to your department can go. But be familiar with the smart cities concept. Be familiar with some of the other things that are coming out there, the modern GIS and the building information modeling. Be familiar with that because it will be the wave of the future.
Excellent. Right, on to you, Captain Mackenzie.
To some of the previous discussion that, yeah, unless you're satisfied or happy with status quo, which to me, let's just get that out of the way for everybody. Move on and imagine moving to what we can do with the fourth industrial revolution or the first data revolution is would say that rather than incremental linear improvement, how about we did a total mindset and what if they dropped all of us, the fire service and its leaders and administrators and elected officials here right now, and we didn't have our wonderful, beautiful, rich traditions and legacies. What if they just dropped us here and they gave us 5G, BIM, digital twins, digital terrain maps, CFDs, ML, AI, mixed reality? If we just had that, what would we build? And so, yes, learn, prepare, and then engage in 2021 in Route 2031. And I ask also the panelists, frankly, if we're saying we need to adapt the industry, how do we get NFPA, U.S. Fire Administration, IFSTA, TEEX, MIFRI, Congressional Fire Service Institute, County Board of Directors, state leaders, and those on the Hill to help us draft what in 1973 was America Burning? Fire deaths in the U.S. are up 20% in the last reported decade based on U.S. Fire Administration data. How do we write? Who's going to write? Let's write America Burning, the digital solution.
Excellent. Right, Chief, now I'm over to you.
I'll start off by saying this, and again, I'll put it in the context of structural firefighting. The built environment is really developing faster with greater complexity and greater hazards and risks to firefighting operations than our tactical models and methodologies really are providing for, which really requires us to embrace and become both literate of technology, its potential and its actual applications for, again, the protection of the public that we serve, the mitigation and the management of those incidences. I truly believe that at the appropriate scale, whether it be at the first due response area, the protection districts, a battalion, a district, a community, or certainly even within the city boundaries, we've got to truly increase our building and fire literacy and put a greater emphasis on integrating the emerging aspects of technology, both in terms of how our built environment is being built and how to leverage the information availability to match up to aid us in serving the public at large. Start thinking like a fireground architect, and if nothing else, again, start embracing technology, its application, and the emerging platforms to leverage our ability to protect the public at large.
Thanks, and we're going to end it with Chief Tracy.
I'd like to mention a couple of things that both Kirk said and Alan. Kirk mentioned, what is NFPA doing in all of this? Quite frankly, they published a report, if you will, or a roadmap. It was a NIST published report, but it was the NFPA Research Foundation. And whenever you mention the NFPA Research Foundation, you have to mention the name Casey Grant, because he's been what an outstanding mentor to the fire service. I appreciate his friendship as well. But it was Smart City, Smart Firefighting in that published report. And really, you know, it was a lot of wishes and where we'd like to be, enhancing communications in buildings and things like that, so many things. So NFPA really is there. We need the fire protection community, the society, SFPE society, to really work a little bit harder for us as well. We need a stronger relationship between the fire service and that community. Alan, you had mentioned something that got my attention. And now I'm trying to think of what it was. Uh, I tell you what, it's humbling getting old, you know, Chris. Uh, but truly, Deb, I would ask you to get us together more often
I
in
would.
these conferences to talk because it's synergistic. You know, more and more comes out of it. The needs that are out there that hopefully you and APX together are going to put together a program that's going to have this buffet of information and all our needs. Now I know what Alan mentioned was we've been to this building more than once. Let's say we've been here many times in the past months. And when you mentioned that, the first thing that came to mind was the Regis Tower in Memphis, Tennessee. If anybody recalls, I know Chris does because he does a lot of case studies and understands. This was a high-rise residential building that department had responded to 26 times in a month for, let's say, if you want to call them nuisance alarms. And when I first was, let's say, exposed to this event, I said to myself, 26 times in a month. I work in Midtown Manhattan. Sometimes I go to one building 10 times in a day. And not that that means anything, but what it means to the fire service is, yes, you have to know why am I responding to these buildings? If they're in fact, what is a nuisance alarm? Well, it could very well be that maybe a smoke detector has to be relocated because every time they open a door, creates dust and it sets that thing. Oh, that's one thing. Or maybe the system needs maintenance. Well, what does that mean? It means that we, the fire service, have to ensure that they're taking care of business, that they're maintaining the systems, and it cuts down on all of these responses because while I'm responding to your building, somebody else could have need for our services and I'm not available. So that's unacceptable. So these are things that we take care of. And yes, the very information that you mentioned, Alan, yeah, that should be available to us so that we can take care of it and find out what's going on and so that we don't become lax and complacent because when that happens firefighters die. And Debbie, you had asked the question, what if we do nothing? Well, that's what happens. If we do nothing, lives are at stake, and it could be firefighters lives and the public we serve. Thank you very much for putting this together, Deb.
No, thank you, and I agree. I would love to get never mind this crew together, but if there are other people that know that they have an opinion that people would like to hear, please reach out. We love collaborating with everybody, and we certainly know that we are strong technologists. I happen to have experience working with the fire industry myself, but I've never been a firefighter, and it would be very careless of us to move forward without actually getting all this expert advice. It's pretty much all we have time for today. Thanks for being patient in that slightly rocky start. I want to give a massive thanks to this group of panelists. What an awesome, engaging conversation. I personally feel really privileged to be able to work with all of you and hope we can continue to do that for a long time. And thank you for everyone who joined us.
I want to remind
Please,
you to I want
yeah,
to remind you to give us a link because
will
there's
do.
people in Europe that it's quite late. Give us a link so that we can give it to them and they can view this. A
Definitely.
shout out to Kim Washerman in Frankfurt, Germany. Love you,
Yeah.
Kim.
We will be sharing it on our LinkedIn page, but we will also email it to all the panelists, so you're welcome to share it with everybody. We're likely to load it onto YouTube so that it's anyone can
Thank
watch
you.
it from anywhere. Appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Debbie.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jerry.
Bye,
Nice to meet
everybody.
you again.